Greetings and welcome to Artfluence Human Rights Festival. My name is Koketso Sachane, and I have the honor of moderating this important discussion on cultural heritage and representation at the Liesbeek River development. I would like to start off by thanking the Artfluence team and the Center for Creative Arts for inviting me to be part of this critical conversation. This is a topic I have engaged in over the past few months purely as a consumer of news, and I'm personally looking forward to understanding the matter even more with our panel. And to help us navigate this topic, our panelists include Chief Zenzile Khoisan of the First Nations Collective, Tauriq Jenkins, a Human Rights Commissioner for the Goringhaicona Indigenous Traditional Council, as well as Artfluence Maria Trifa, a PhD graduate whose research focuses on, amongst others, stimulating the sustainable development of urban historic areas. At the center of what we will be discussing is a debate around the 4.6 billion rand construction of the African headquarters of Amazon alongside the banks of the Liesbeek River, just outside of the Cape Town suburb of Observatory. We know that the area in question, of course, is of cultural and historical significance, as it is the site where the indigenous Khoi people waged a resistance against Portuguese colonizers. Where the construction project is now is that the Traditional Council were successful in interdicting the project from continuing until they are consulted on how the Khoi will be represented on the project. As I mentioned, personally, I have engaged with this contentious issue purely from following the news, and I look forward to understanding the matter more through the positions of those represented in our panel for today. So welcome to the three of you. Where we are going to start is we'll have a presentation from Raluca, and I'll also be giving an opportunity for both Zenzile and Tauriq to give us their position on the matter. And then the conversation will proceed from there on. You are encouraged, of course, to submit any of your questions, comments that you would like. Looking forward to your inputs as well. But I think as a start, if we can hand over to you, Raluca, for your presentation. Once again, welcome and thank you very much for being part of this panel.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. I am Raluca Trifa. I'm from Romania, and I work as an assistant teacher at the Ion Mincu University in Bucharest. And for a few years, I've been interested, as you mentioned already, in the built heritage and how it can help or not the sustainable development of a city. And I will share my presentation with you. It's a study case on Bucharest, chance or curse, negotiating built heritage in historic city. A study case, as I already said, Bucharest, Romania. Bucharest is the capital city of Romania. It's located in the southeast part of the country, and it's not a very old city, so compared to other European cities. Most of its built heritage dates back from the second half of the 19th century, because in 1847, almost the entire city was destroyed by a great fire. But after the beginning of the 20th century, Bucharest transformed itself. As you see, there is a constant growth population, and most of the architecture that was built during that period was inspired by the French model. A lot of residential building and also public buildings were constructed in the city, as I already mentioned, inspired by the French architecture. Another important moment in the development of Bucharest was 1922, when it was elected as the capital city of the Great Romania after the First World War. And as a result, it grew constantly, and the new architectural style that were in fashion as the modernist or the Art Deco were also adopted. But then came a very black period for the heritage, the built heritage of Bucharest, although it's known as the golden era. is the period when the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu ruled Romania between 1965 up until 1989. And this is a period when a lot of radical urban systematization, massive demolition took place in order to make room for new block of flats and large public buildings. As you see in the left side of the image, there is an imprint of the demolition that took place in Bucharest during Ceausescu's regime. And if we sum up all the red splashes, we will end up with a surface similar to the surface of Venice. So it's quite a massive demolition that took place during almost 3 decades. And just to sum up, in here is the House of People, which today is the Parliament of Romania, the second largest building in the world. And this is how it looks today and how it looked in the interwar period, just to have a clue about the scale of the demolition. Of course, immediately after that, in 1999, the specialists concerned about the historical heritage made all the necessary took all the necessary measures in order to preserve what was left of the built heritage in Bucharest. As a result, they established 98 built protected areas that sum up to almost 15% of the surface of Romanian capital. And they also adopted local urbanism regulation for these built protected areas. But the current situation is not that happy. As you see, this is an image from the historical city center of Bucharest, one of the most visited places in the city. And this is a street that has a lot of abandoned buildings, unused, mostly because of certain legal aspects that are not quite clear. Then we have a lot of examples of abusive demolitions. In here you have 2 images of 2 historical monuments that were recently demolished. We have a lot of cases of mutilation of the heritage, or once again, mutilation that involves new buildings. This is a historical house that's built from the 19th century, and on top of it, as you can see, a new block of flats appeared, and just a part of the building was kept. This is not a singular example. There are a lot of examples, and I chose only 2 of them that once again involve historical monuments that received on top new extensions. Even if historical monuments are not concerned, the new interventions, the new buildings often do not comply with the regulations for the built protected areas. And in here you have an example, but also 2 other examples. And now to come close to the subject of this debate, I will show you just 3 cases, recent cases. One of them is the construction of Târzei-Buzești Boulevard. This is a project that was intended to be built during Ceausescu's regime, but the communists didn't manage to do so. And it was a project that intended to connect the House of People, which I said that is the Parliament of Romania today, with the building of the government. The street existed, but the officials wanted to enlarge it and to create a boulevard. These are some images from the area that dates back from the 70s. And at the core of this project is the main market hall, Matache Market Hall. which is listed as a historical monument. In here you have some images from the interior of the market hall. It's not a spectacular building, but it had some cultural value, especially symbolic and social value for the inhabitants of the area. At first, the project was adopted in 2006 without having all the necessary building permit, all the necessary approvals, let's say. And in 2010, the Justice Court cancelled the urban plan that was the base for this project. But of course, the City Hall adopted a new urban plan, which made some changes to the original one and proposes the demolition of several buildings, including the market hall. In here is an image of the market hall before its demolition in 2010, and the urban plan proposal for the new boulevard. Of course, there were a lot of protests during 2011-2012, but the works on the boulevard continued. In here you have some images from the construction site. A lot of buildings were demolished in order to make place for the new boulevard, some of them listed as historical monuments. But the market hall was still standing in 2012. A group of architects offered an alternative project that maintained the idea of the boulevard, but also the preservation of the market hall. There were a lot of debates regarding this project, but the mayor didn't agree with it. And so he decided to move the market hall 37 meters and 20 centimeters further, but instead, during one night, during a snowstorm, the market hall was demolished in order to prevent the people to protest and the press to document this action. This is how it looked the next day. And as a conclusion, 70 buildings were demolished, 12 of them listed as historical monuments, including the market hall. And in 2018, the Justice Court decided that the decision to build this boulevard was illegal. As a result, all the demolitions were illegal as well. The mayor at the time, the former mayor, is accused of taking bribes, money laundering, abuse of service, and forming an organized criminal group. And he was first sentenced to 5 years and 4 months in prison, but the final decision is expected in May. But what was left after the construction of this boulevard? Of course, there are a lot of vacant lands that cannot be built because the surface of the area is too small, the plot is too small in order to build a new building. There are a lot of abandoned buildings that were not demolished, but neither restored. There are a lot of blind walls like this one that were subject to some street art contests in order to make the space more livable. And these are two examples in the same way. And then again, some new buildings were constructed. As you can see, this is how the plot looked before, and this is the new building that was erected in the area. You see here part of the old construction that were on site. I don't need to say that this building does not comply with the built protected areas regulation, so it's obvious. It has nothing to do with the surrounding architecture. Another example quite similar is the former Ford factory, which was the subject of a real estate development. This factory was located in a very nice neighborhood in Bucharest named Floreasca. It's, as you can see, a very low-rise block of flats with a lot of parks and greenery, so it's quite a pleasant neighborhood to live in. And one of the main attraction of the neighborhood was the former Ford factory, which once again is listed as a historical monument. But in 2011, the General Council of Bucharest approved the construction of 4 towers, 25 floors up to 15 floors for offices and housing. The investment was estimated to be around 100 million euros. The problem is that the high rise has nothing to do with the characteristic of the neighborhood. And of course, the community protested and tried to stop the project. The owners changed several times the project, but in 2018, they had all the necessary approval and started the work on site. Once again, the community, the local community opened a process, and the Justice Court decided to suspend the building permit. But the owner once again changed the project and came up with another project that was quickly adopted by the City Hall. And as I already said, the work on site continued. And this is how the project looked in 2019. It was finished in 2020. You can see here the difference in scale between the surrounding area and the plot where these 4 towers were built. Unfortunately, the main building, the Ford factory, was not restored as it's visible in these images. And now I go to the last study case, which is a palace that was the subject of a development for a shopping mall. This palace, Știerbai Palace, is located in one of the most important and richest in architectural heritage street in Bucharest, Calea Victoriei. As you can see, it has several exceptional examples of architecture. And it was the residence of one of the rulers of Romania in the 19th century. The building changed a lot during the 20th century. And this is how it looks today. It was sold for 11 million euros, and the owner planned to invest 120 million euros in order to restore it and to create the shopping mall that I already mentioned. The main interest was actually the garden that is behind the palace. And because it has a very big size and it's located exactly in the city center of Bucharest, the owner speculated the entire area in order to build the new shopping mall. And as you can see, the scale is quite different. And he wanted to build the entire lot. Of course, in order to do so, some buildings that were on site needed to be demolished. In 2008, most of the buildings were demolished, except for the main building, the palace that is located on Calea Victoriei. But all the ministers of culture refused to approve the project up until 2013, when the project was secretly voted and received all the necessary approvals from the Ministry of Culture, in spite of the protests that took place during the years.
Right. We are, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to just interrupt you there, Raluca. Just looking at the time and wanting to make sure that we also cover all the other areas as well. And I do appreciate what you've shared. And maybe in your further responses, we can bring in elements of what else is left on your presentation. But I'm just looking at the time and making sure that we are able to bring in our other panelists and engage in the conversation. What I do appreciate about what you've shared, and I was making notes on the side as you were talking, where looking at these scenes, and of course it's Bucharest, it's not South Africa, but the similarities that I'm seeing and how it links up to our discussion, I'm reminded purely from those images of what has been happening in Cape Town on the outskirts of what we're discussing this evening, or this today rather, the area of Woodstock in Cape Town with gentrification, a lot of people or movements, the involvement of government, the involvement of big business, the involvement of money. And I'm just seeing those similarities as well and how it links up, especially on the outskirts of what we are discussing. But I do appreciate your insights and what you have shared there. I want to now move on and give an opportunity for about 5 minutes, Zenzile, who is Zenzile Khoisan, Chief Zenzile Khoisan of the First Nation Collective. And as you might have known if you've been following the story, the collective arguing that they did rather get the developers of the area to revise their initial development process to include a certain world-class facilities where there will be cultural heritage that is restored in the area. But Zenzile, you know more about this. On behalf of the First Nations Collective, you've got 5 minutes to state your position on the matter. And again, thank you very much for making time, brother.
Thank you very much, Kokeso, and thank you to Raluca for a very insightful presentation about, critical heritage questions in Bucharest. Look, for me, as the spokesperson for the Western Cape First Nations Collective, since we're dealing with an institution like Artfluence, I'd like to draw on inspiration of one of the poets that has inspired me in my life, Pablo Neruda, from his book, from his collection of poetry, Isla Negra, and where he writes, "There is no clear light." And there's just a particular stanza of that particular poem, which says, "Yesterday's hours, stitched by life, threaded on a bloodstained needle, between decisions endlessly unfulfilled, the infinite beat of the sea and of doubt, the quiver of the sky and its jasmine." And for me, if I have to locate this discussion into where we are at, you introduced the space that is under contestation here in Cape Town, the River Club development, which constitutes about 4% of what is called the Two Rivers Urban Parkway. Park, which is historical. The broader Two Rivers is a historical space. It's a very built-up space all around. There's where the Gorinhaicona kraals used to be built. There's a hospital on the one side. There are highways aft of us. There is the State Information Agency has a building across the way. We have student accommodation in Woodstock, and we have a whole range, there's entire neighborhoods that have been built up in areas that were once occupied by indigenous people, from which they were forcefully dispossessed about 4 centuries ago as bird flies. Look, the question for me here is, we are in a space where we, as the First Nations Collective, and who are we? The Western Cape First Nations Collective is constituted of all the major houses, structures, and leadership that have actually been part of what is called the Khoisan resurgence in South Africa. And over more than 30 years, we've interlocuted with the South African government about this particular space. This particular space called the River Club is a space that historically, for hundreds of years, was a swamp. There was nothing but a waterlogged area here. It was a deeply impassable area. It was a traverse space. It was then a dumping ground for more than 50, 60 years by the railways and harbors. Then there was a racist club, the Railways and Harbors Club, which was a white-only club. Then it was a golf course with a parking lot. That is the space where we are on, the River Club development. The First Nations people, I'm talking about the structures, have engaged everywhere from the apex of governance, that is the presidency over many incarnations, to the mayors of Cape Town, premiers of Cape Town, and numerous other tiers of leadership in governance, to demand the restoration of our heritage. Our fight in the resurgence is for the restitution of our people, the recognition of our people, and the restoration of our heritage and culture. Over those 3 decades, all we have had is our voice being bludgeoned into silence. We've been basically declared invisible. Even in South Africa today, the Khoi language and its history and culture is not recognized. And as a discount, the South African government has given the Khoi and San people, a foundational people, only a discount in its coat of arms, which is Khe et Kara Khe, which means unity in our confusion. Now, in this place of having no clear light and having no clear answer from the people who have the instruments to make a decision about declaring and giving First Nation people a space where heritage could be celebrated, we had to either follow the path of endless decisions, endlessly unfulfilled, being sent through a maze of a paper trail where our voice is not heard, where we are bludgeoned into invisibility, or we could exercise our right of indigenous cultural agency. When this government, not us, when this government, through its parastatal Transnet, sold this piece of land, this small piece of land inside the Two Rivers Urban Park to a developer, we had to deal with the fact that the developer had a notice of intent to develop. Now we could either continue being paper pushed by government, or we could act in our own interest. Now we as the leaders. Oh no, let me finish.
30 seconds, my brother.
30 seconds. Now we, in our own interest, chose to engage with the developer, and as such, we won, for the first time in the history of South Africa, a world-class heritage precinct which does not exist anywhere in South Africa.
Appreciate it, Zenzile. Thank you very much. I gave a few more minutes there in allowing for you. Of course, you've given that historical context and concluding, as you did, with the reasons behind the decision that you have taken as a First Nation collective in terms of this development. Tauriq Jenkins, of course, still with us. Really appreciate you being the High Commissioner of the Goringhaicona Council, who is also, of course, under Paramount Chief Aran, who's an accredited Section 11 South African Human Rights Commission monitor. Brother, thank you very much. You also, I gave Zenzile an additional 2 minutes or 7 minutes for you. I am really, really interested in the engagement that we'll be having beyond your representations. And I would like to encourage those who, of course, are part of this conversation to share your questions with us. We do have still a bit of time to engage with you as well. But Brother Tauriq, your 7 minutes and your position on this on behalf of the council as well. Welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Koketso. And again, thank you, Raluca, for your presentation. Just to briefly respond to what you've shared with us, I think the way how we would relate to is the fact of how the state has particular kind of bodies that are in place to protect heritage. There are a number of policies, for example, in the city of Cape Town called, similar to what you were describing in the city center in Bucharest, of a heritage protection overlay zone. And we see the extent to which heritage protected areas are compromised and disabused because of particular kinds of coalitions, with the state, with provincial bodies and with municipalities, in order to cater to what is an industrial a complex around large buildings, where a scale of the kind that you were speaking about are so destructive and so devastating in terms of the impact that they have on people's lives, not just in terms of them being forcibly removed, but also in terms of the desiccation of heritage, both intangible and tangible. I think that you've also provided a very strong parallel in terms of some of the struggles that we have in our country with regards state actors as well as provincial and municipal actors that gauge with large, development consortia in ways that that would push through very big and inappropriate kind of developments of the scale that you've seen, where we, I was very struck by that extremely mutilating aspect of a heritage building, almost now standing next to an apartment block. It just shows the degree of the kind of gentrification, the kind of lack of consideration for not just the aesthetic, but the way that it impacts on people's living and how they relate to the environment. In our context here, we're talking about a precinct which is an epicenter of liberation and resistance. It is where the first frontier wars were fought in 1510. It is also where land was stolen for the very first time in our country in 1657, where the then largest commercial company on earth gifted land for the first time to its employees, the Freeburger farmers, deploying Roman Dutch law as an excuse to alienate and to disenfranchise and to legitimize land theft of indigenous communities for the first time in our country. And it is right here at the River Club where, for example, the colonizer Jan van Riebeeck himself took over this particular parcel of land from Mostert. Mostert, who was one of the first holders of that property, could not conduct his ambition of maintaining an agricultural sort of project, and it was van Riebeeck then who deployed a militarized barrack and also deployed slaves from the Dutch East India Company colonies, which then, through the use of the subjugation of the indigenous communities by the sword, and then eventually the use of slave labor by the whip, together began the conquest of dispossession as we understand it in this country. This then led to in 1659 for the first frontier wars that precipitated over 200-year period many wars of liberation and resistance. We call it the Goringhaicona, and the result of this fanned across the Southern African terrain. So the significance of the site is not only located to observatory itself or the city of Cape Town, but can see a particular footprint, across the South African sort of borders, like Namibia, Botswana, Angola, and so forth. So we see that this is a place where the etchings of the unrecognized genocide of the Cape Sound took place. It is where the Holocaust of the Khoi began, and the survivors of that Holocaust are the living embodied citizens of the city who are subjected to apartheid special planning in the concrete jungles of the Cape Flats. And so the aspirations of the communities and individuals, as well as Khoi councils that we represent in this particular court case, feel that you cannot justify, for example, the devastation of a floodplain with the imposition of 100,000, 150,000 square meters of concrete bulk. So far, we've seen the complete desecration of parts of a sacred river, the old Liesbeek channel. And so this development goes against the symbiotic relationship that indigenous communities have with the environment, the cosmos, and with the sense of wanting to recognize the place of dispossession from which restorative justice and restitution and a reconciliation commission for the San and Khoi will emerge. But to have an Amazon, for example, African headquarters, of this particular size and bulk that violates the city's own environmental policies, provincial policies, and it opens up a number of questions in terms of how cultural agency is being deployed, and for us it's very clear that the heritage is not for sale, that the intangible and spiritual sanctity of this place speaks to a collective memory of belonging and meaning and dignity, not just to the San and Khoi, but to all South Africans and to Southern Africans. And in fact, when we speak about dispossession and memorialization, what aspects of this particular kind of egregious development of this particular scale in any way can view itself as a manumission, a symbol of our liberation, a symbol of our freedom. In fact, even having the kind of compensatory components of having a media center on top of a concrete block that will suffocate the floodplain is more of an epitaph that signals almost a final solution to the aspirations of a spiritual sense of historicity that is absolutely laden in this thing. And what we've seen is that there are parties that have created a Bermuda Triangle on this very significant site to argue a forced removal of very important intangible and tangible heritage resources. And this is something that we will fight against, and we wish this place to be preserved for all South Africans, especially for the San and Khoi, for dignity to be preserved and for it to be indeed moved towards the aspirations of a World Heritage Site, where we will come to a place of return, where the first sin that was committed will be
Your 7 minutes is up, brother.
And I think that we find a lot of resonance in what Raluca has been saying, and thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Tauriq. Much appreciated. I'm going to keep saying this because it is true in that for me, I get to immerse myself in this subject that I've observed from a distance. And what I've heard, and I'm going to focus specifically on what Zenzile has said and what Tauriq has said, I think there is no question or dispute around the history of what we're talking about. What seems to be a dispute now is what's happening right now. And I struggle, to be very honest, and I'd like both of you to respond to this, because at the core of our discussion, of course, cultural heritage, but also representation, right? And for me, it seems like, and it sounds like we have two specific groups, if not more, that might not necessarily be in this discussion, but two specific groups that are representing the same people, right? And you can correct me on this, but the question that I have for the both of you, and we'll start with you, Zenzile, and I'll give you 2 minutes to respond to this, is if at the core we're talking about representing the First Nation people on this important matter, an important area of such historical and cultural significance, why do we not have unity? Seemingly, we don't have unity on what needs to be done and how it should be done. Zenzile, 2 minutes.
First thing is that it's a falsehood to say that the Battle of Gorinhaicona of 1510 occurred on this site. You just have to consult the historical record. That battle, the main battle, occurred somewhere in at the estuary of the Salt River, which is where Pardon Island is. That area is where De Almeida and his men's bones are interred. The other part of it is the organization that is a party to Tauriq's group involved in this court case is the Observatory Civic Association, which Tauriq represented for many years. He was never part, he became part of the Khoi structures about 2 to 3 years ago, 3 years ago. And you know yourself, and the media in South Africa have a historical record about who was at Oudtshoorn, what the 30 years look like. There are many groups that were created in the slipstream of this development and people that have stood up. We stand against them because the historical record contests that. The question for us, these people did nothing to stand up against the waterfront when it was built, which is where the ships landed of Jan van Riebeeck, against the building of the Cape Town International Convention Center. All over Cape Town, developments are built. They concentrate their area in a place which has been an exclusive enterprise of white privilege. Observatory is actually the place that has to be flattened and given back to the Khoi, because observatory, represented by the Observatory Civic Association, is one of the first areas that were taken by Jan van Riebeeck. This place in the River Club, nobody lived here. You have to consult Patrick Tauriq's Mallet's book, which shows that it was a swamp.
2 minutes, Zenzile. Thank you very much. Tauriq, your 2 minutes, and responding to that question, and you might want to touch on what Zenzile has taken issue with, but my question remains around the question of unity. Your 2 minutes.
I think just to quickly nullify certain claims, there was a 2-year heritage tribunal that took place with Heritage Western Cape between 2018 and 2020, and there all the San and Khoi groups, which represented basically a Southern African footprint, agreed that this development was inappropriate. In fact, Heritage Western Cape put a 2-year moratorium to stop any inappropriate development on the site. It was only in the latter half of that particular process, when the Department of Public Works responded to the tribunal chair in that a meaningful process of consultation needed to take place, that emerged out of a report funded by the developer, came this entity called the First Nations Collective. So when we talk about slipstream and all those kinds of things, there are 2 things that perhaps I'd want to say about that. Is that first of all, the heritage of the site is completely undisputed. Secondly, the emergence of an entity called the First Nations Collective emerged pretty much around the same time that the developer required a group of Indigenous people to speak for its ambitions. And so it is around the synchronicity and the extent and how this particular group had formed itself as a strong collective in full support of every single aspect of the development, because none of the leaders within the context of that collective have spoken against the development. We see the destruction of a sacred river, and we see a destruction of a very important sacred floodplain. The aspect about unity is really around the fact that the Western Cape had suffered 178 years of colonial aggression, more than other parts of this country. So the extent
Tauriq, I'm going to unfortunately interrupt. Yep. I'm going to unfortunately interrupt, because what I'm trying to do, and I'm keeping track of time and the amount of time that is afforded to each of you. And gentlemen, you'll utilize the time as you see fit, but you're going to have to deal with me interrupting you. Right, look, I want to bring you back into the conversation. And before I pose a question to you, just a reminder again for those who have joined us, you're more than welcome to pose your questions into the chat group. It might be questions directed at Zenzile or at Tauriq. Please feel free to do so. What I wanted to ask, Raluca, you've had the benefit of sitting and listening to this discussion that, of course, can get somewhat emotive. It's deep historical matters, and we've got these 2 positions, strong positions on both ends of it. But in coming back to the research that you have done and talking about stimulating sustainable development in urban historic areas, when it comes to representation and when it comes to the involvement and consultation of all people, what is at risk? What is at risk in ensuring that sustainable development of these historic areas?
Well, this is a tough question, because all the sites differ, and it's like, comparing 2 different problems. And I understand that that the discussion today, it's quite different than the examples that I already presented, because it's a different country. It's there are a lot of similarities, but still there are a lot of differences. I think the thing that can be very easily lost is the cultural identity, and it's that it's something that is visible in Bucharest, and I think that the development that is in subject now, if it would be implemented, it will definitely affect the cultural identity of that place and of the population, the Khoi population that you are talking about. So this is a very tough question, and I think it's for me, being an outsider, it's even difficult, more difficult to answer.
Yeah, and I think maybe no, I get it. I understand that, and maybe this is an area as well that this is what I can throw back to our guests, our other panelists, and Zenzile, bringing you back in here. I have you could argue, a personal vested interest in trying to see some form of unity around this matter, and maybe in going back to where the project is right now, the fact that of course there's been the court interdict and what needs to happen in the meantime, Zenzile, but is there room for there to be a discussion amongst yourselves as a broader collective to be able to find a solution to this matter? Is there a way in which the development either can or cannot happen, but in the end we are seeing unity amongst yourselves and also the preservation of the cultural significance of what we're talking about? Is Zenzile still there?
I think, sorry, I think he's not.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. But Tauriq, we've got about 10 minutes, if not slightly longer. But what can be done here? I'm seeking a solution. I'm seeking a way in which there can be some sort of understanding on this. Maybe I should ask you this. Is your position a hardline position of this development should not happen at all? Or is there room to maneuver, taking into consideration what is at the core of what you shared with us today?
Thank you, Khoisan. So I'll answer your question, which is in fact in two parts. The first one around meaningful consultation. The First Nations Collective with the City of Cape Town and the Western Cape government have decided to attack the ruling dealing with meaningful consultation to the Supreme Court. So I think there already is a very clear understanding in terms of where they're heading with that. This is completely not our position. We are in court simply because meaningful consultation has never taken place. In fact, one could argue it has never taken place properly since 1657, since the disposition took place in the first instance. To answer your second question, I think that what is deeply unfortunate is that even in the 2-year heritage tribunal process, the developer and the city and the province heard that this is sacred terrain. Unfortunately, we have a situation where parts of the old Liesbeek channel has been almost irreversibly destroyed. It's a heritage crime. And now we also have an incomplete dystopian 4-story concrete build that's sitting on the middle of the floodplain. The same way that people will employ to put that inappropriate development up should be employed to take that down bit by bit, stone by stone, concrete and pole by pole, because concrete cannot, in this particular instance, be championed as a conversion of an aspiration of what we are talking about. What we're talking about is a deeply sensitive matter that speaks to all of us as people. There is a hole in our subconscious, and that's because the very first instance of dispossession has actually not been dealt with appropriately. And so to want to monumentalize that or to want to commemorate it means it has to undergo a decolonial framework of a kind of participatory process. And that framework is something that belongs to the people and cannot be dictated to by two governments, a private developer, and a group of individuals who for themselves have decided to exert a particular kind of cultural agency that's going to strip us of the opportunity of this kind of potential for healing. I think that on the economic factor, we're dealing with the world's largest company as a tenant. It was offered 5 places to put its building. And I think that the responsible thing is that, it should take any of those 5 places and pursue what it wanted to pursue. But as we've said for many years, that this is just not an appropriate scale. It's not an appropriate building. And the developer has shown very little sign in terms of acquiescing to, to the scale of the build in ways that we feel are appropriate.
All right, thank you very much, Tauriq. Zenzile, I'm glad that we've got you back, and I've got a heads up from the Artfluence team that we can go over slightly, so I'm glad that we're able to reconnect with you. Zenzile, a question that I asked to you, which Tauriq was responding to, is a question around the possibility of finding common ground when it comes to this. And by the common ground, I'm talking about the position that you have as a council and the position that that you have as a collective. Is there an opportunity here for common ground? Is there a way in which we can find some common ground where in the end everybody's views are taken into consideration and their positions on the matter?
Okay, first of all, let me say that our brothers and sisters that are in what has now been characterized as another camp are our brothers and sisters. We represent strong, historically grounded houses, and we are not unsaddened by what is going on. I personally feel the pain. You personally know how deeply I feel about how all our people are about this thing. The issue is that Tauriq Jenkins and the group he represents did not sell the River Club to a private developer. It is a government parastatal that did that. But the question for us is that there is no place in South Africa for memorialization of culture. And we can either go endlessly around this road of paper pushing, or we can find a place of anchorage. In that place of anchorage, and by the way, if anybody should consult the development plan, the First Nations heritage precinct that will be developed will be on the scale that every First Nations person in the world will be proud of. So it is not only for us, but for the whole world. That's the first thing. The second thing is finding common ground, finding ourselves is a process. And finding that process is a process sometimes in families. There are differences of opinion, differences of strategy and tactics. Before this thing happened, Tauriq Jenkins and I knew each other. We still know each other. I know many of the people on the other side of this divide. The divide is not a divide that we created. The question before us is that the elders had to make a decision. We chose a road. Now history will prove whether we are going to be absolved by that position or not. But along the way, we are certain we will find each other. The other thing that I'd like to say is that for Artfluence to have hosted a debate such as this is what is more needed, because in this way, we find more spaces in which the hurt and harm that we have from our centuries of unprocessed pain can be dealt with and expiated. And Tauriq and I are both artists. We will find each other, but first, let us see whether we have chosen a path that can emerge victorious.
Thank you very much, Zenzile. And I think in reiterating Zenzile's position, there's a comment that we received via Facebook from Princess Chantel Revel saying, I'm a part of the Western Cape First Nation Collective and can testify to what Chief Zenzile has said. It has been a long, hard road, and I salute Chief Zenzile and our chairperson and for fighting to get our space back. This is the first of its kind in South Africa. Nowhere in South Africa will we find a space that is afforded to us like at this development. Thank you very much for your comments there. An area that we have touched on, both yourself, Tauriq, and Zenzile, and also historically, if you look at the role of government in terms of what Raluca has shared with us, we haven't had much time to deal with it. The role of government in this, the three spheres of government. I mean, Zenzile, you spoke about over the years, the level of engagement that you've had. And similarly, Tauriq, you've touched on the question of government, but with the limited time that we have, Tauriq, starting with you, what role has government played in where we are today, and what role, if any, can they play moving forward? You've got 2 minutes.
We're dealing with a situation of ethnocide, of language loss, of a very severe and extreme manifestation of colonialism that still exists in this province. The Western Cape government is one still to this day that inherits the memes of the Dutch East India Company, and so does the city of Cape Town. And we see that being played out acutely in this particular instance, where they are in very strong sort of hand in glove with the private developer in order to desecrate what we consider to be an incredibly important part of a national heritage estate. I think the question where I may resonate with my counterpart is, what is the role of national government here? What is the role of the heritage resources agencies that should be stepping in to protect the legacies here? We have a situation, for example, out on Table Mountain, where a battery belonging to the South African National Defence Force is now being used on Goringhaicona, a sacred heritage site, for a 21-suite hotel. It's converting that battery into another a commodified piece of enterprise, again on sacred terrain, and that's in conjunction with sand parks, and so we have a litany of problems in as far as how the San and Khoi communities are being recognized and placed back into the center. I think that what's very important in terms of our national collective and the consciousness of who we are is that once the San and Khoi have been placed into the center in meaningful ways, in ways that embody not just the sense of humanity, which over time has been disembodied, but in ways that are truly committed to restorative justice and the recognition of issues like genocide, massacre, forced removal. These are very important aspects that government has to come to terms with, because these principles need to be asserted, and that is part of, I think that is part of the struggle that we are facing.
All right, thank you very much, Tauriq. We're going to wrap in a few, but Zenzile, I'm going to allow you an opportunity to also respond to the same question, and then I'll give each one of our panelists a minute to give your final thoughts there. But Zenzile, the role of government leading up to now and moving forward, 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I have to remember the words of Kwame Ture, Stokkie Michael, where he once said, "You can't ride to freedom on Pharaoh's chariot." And the new pharaohs for me are the ANC government, which came to power on a liberation ticket, but has taken 28 years where it still has not recognized the Khoi and the San. How must I go and appeal to a government that I helped create, that the Khoi and the San suffered for, that even today they don't honor us by recognizing that we are a people? They never recognize our leadership or our language in this country. We are, like Steve Biko said, the Khoi person and the San person are tired of standing at the touchline watching a game that they should be playing. Today, we have to make a choice of standing up in our own interest. And I believe when people in the other part of our Khoisan groupings come together, we can exercise indigenous cultural agency and utilize the heritage space at the River Club as a liberated zone from which we can fight many more battles.
Thank you very much, Zenzile. We have reached the conclusion of our discussion, and as mentioned, I'm going to give each of you a minute to give your final thoughts on this. Raluca, let's come back to you. We started with you. A lot has been said, and I'm sure also for you personally, have absorbed and learned a lot from what's happening here locally in South Africa. And again, I appreciate you for all the insights that you shared earlier on the similarities that we have seen when it comes to the history of Bucharest. You've got a minute, my sister, to conclude.
Thank you. So I think that for every intervention regarding the built heritage, or the heritage in general, the cultural heritage, we need to judiciously analyze all the aspects, and we need to put the common good, the common, the common good, above the individual interests. So this is something that we need to think about. The government is, it can change, but the cultural identity of a people or of a community, it's still there. So it needs to be respected, and it needs to be transmitted further to the other generation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Tauriq, your parting shots for now, brother.
This is a site of where the first frontier wars were fought. We are now in a final frontier. I think it is not true to say that one can create a liberated zone when you're at the behest of maximal white privilege. We're talking about an entity which has an all-white board, the Liesbeek Leisure Property Trust, which belongs to one of the largest all-white construction companies in South Africa, Zenpop, which of course is doing its bidding for the largest company on earth, which is run by a white male. And so when we talk about how do we begin the foundations of a place for liberation, we need to ensure that the kind of devastation and destruction and the divide and conquer mechanisms that are being deployed are things that do not run by unaccounted for. This is a ground zero precinct. It is an epicenter of who we are, and I think that it holds the keys to the kind of healing that we all need, and the restorative justice that is being so deeply sought for all of us.
All right, appreciate you, brother. Thank you very much. Zenzile, 1 minute.
All the pharaohs of before and for time immemorial have sought to vanquish the foundational peoples. We seek to ensure that our voice from antiquity to these modern times will resonate right around the world. The heritage precinct that will be established at the River Club, without any doubt, is going to send shockwaves throughout South Africa and throughout the world. Long may its pathway be cleared of all obstacles.
Thank you very much, Zenzile. Thank you very much to our three guests. I think there's no question that there is no dispute around the cultural significance of what we've spoken of, the importance of the cultural heritage, the importance of representation. And Zenzile, in drawing from your words around the fact that, broadly speaking, that you are a family, and hopefully we'll be able to navigate through it all without losing the core of what each family member stands for. I look forward to the day where there can be this broader unity around what needs to happen, and also at the same time, of course, preserving what is important to the area. Thank you very much to the three of you. Much appreciated once again to you. Raluca, thank you very much. Zenzile, Khoisan, thank you. Tauriq Jenkins, and a word of appreciation once again to the Artfluence Human Rights Festival team, as well as the Center for Creative Arts for inviting me and starting this conversation. It is the start. And hopefully we'll be able to engage a bit more on it. We're never going to find a solution today, but we started somewhere, and I really appreciate that. Thank you very much to you for being part of the panel, and to you for joining us online as well on our Facebook page and on YouTube. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Think moments and memories. Make magic and movies. Share between sons and daughters, or just friends in their quarter. More music, more movement, more space for amusement, where history was made and the future is paved. Adventure awaits. Together, embraced. Just down the highway. Think Midlands, my way.